In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look. Right, I don't know what's going on. I've been trying to record this damn intro for this video for the last half an hour, and every time I try and speak, all that comes out of my mouth is just like blah, 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 blah. This is a new camera by Hawkeye. It's called a Thumb. It says so on the backlet. This camera is designed to be like the Runcam Thumb. It looks very similar to the Runcam Thumb, doesn't it? But the important thing to mention is this camera is a lot cheaper than the Runcam Thumb, but it's got a lot better features. In this video, we're going to talk about this camera, and yeah, welcome to the video. Okay, so as I just explained in that terrible introduction, this is the Hawkeye Thumb. It is very much designed to be competition for the Runcam Thumb Pro because it has got some very similar specs. This is a 4K small form factor action camera. It has a built-in gyro, so you can stabilize your flight footage after flight so it looks nice and silky smooth. Crucially though, there are a couple of key differences in this camera which actually make it much more advanced than the Runcam Thumb Pro. But as I mentioned a minute ago, this camera is also quite a lot cheaper. I think this camera is selling for £60, whereas the Runcam Thumb Pro is selling for £80. So potentially, you're getting a lot more for your money with this camera if it turns out to be any good. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. To start with, I'll just give you a little tour of the camera, how it looks on all sides, and then I'll show you the box and what comes in the box. And then I'll talk you through some of the tests that I've done with this camera and show you some footage to hopefully help you get an idea whether you think this camera is any good for you. So yeah, let's get started by just having a look at the camera. So obviously on the front there is the lens, and this little part of the lens actually is removable. You can take that off and then you can replace that with an ND filter if you want. Beside the lens there is then this button here. This is the record start and stop button, but it's also used for changing modes. And then just down there, hopefully you can see it, there's a little LED there. That obviously flashes on and off to let you know the camera's recording. And it also changes color just to let you know what mode the camera is in. Moving to the side of the camera, this is quite a nice feature actually. They've put a USB-C connector on here. The Runcam Thumb and the Runcam Thumb Pro both use the old USB micro connector. And that used to really annoy me because that's such an old-fashioned, outdated connector. Every time I ever went to connect a Runcam Thumb to my computer, I was hunting around trying to find an old cable from 2011. No one owns USB micro cables anymore. So it's really nice that they, Hawkeye, have put a USB-C connector on. It's a nice modern connector, and yeah, I've got plenty of those cables. I'll talk a little bit more about what this connector is used for in a minute. Moving to the other side of the camera, this is then where the SD card goes in, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this. What they've done is they've actually put a little retention clip over the SD card slot, so if you ever have a crash, hopefully the SD card won't ever ping out, which is a nice little feature. There's nothing on the top of the camera, but if we just move to the bottom of the camera, bit of an interesting design choice by Hawkeye here, but they've actually included mounting brackets. It's actually part of the camera. I don't know whether I like that or not. Some people will, some people won't. But yeah, at least it saves you having to 3D print a mount if you ever want to connect this camera up to your aircraft. Then moving to the back of the camera, this is where you connect the power tube, but there's also a second port, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But there are two ports on the back here, rather than the one that you just get on the Runcam Thumb or the Runcam Thumb Pro. Anyway, now we've had a look at the camera, let me show you what comes in the box. I just want to mention that Hawkeye sent me this camera a couple of weeks ago now. I'm a bit late getting this review out. But this is the box that they sent me. And as you can see, it's a very, very basic, very bland looking box. Now what I'm wondering is if they sent me this box because this was a pre-release. Maybe if you order the camera now, it comes in a nicer box than this. But yeah, I just wanted to just show you that the box they sent me is very, very bland, but it doesn't really matter what the packaging looks like though, does it? It's the quality of the product inside is what matters. But anyway, to show you what came in the box, so the first thing that you get is an instruction leaflet. This is just a small one-sided instruction leaflet. and half of it is written in Chinese. The other half is written in English. I've got it upside down, haven't I? Yeah, this way, that way, that way. There you go. It just covers some very basic instructions, kind of just explains what the buttons do, explains what some of the things are in the box, and just the basic operation. But down here is a little QR code, and if you scan that, it will take you to an online manual, which is way more advanced. It covers a lot more features, including how to do a lot of the gyro flow stuff. So that's very good. Next thing you get in the box, you get some stickers. And I've got no idea what these say. At first I thought they were all the same, but actually if you look at them carefully, you'll see that they're all a little bit different. If I've got anyone out there that can speak Chinese or Japanese or Mandarin, if you could translate what this says, I'd be interested to know, because I haven't got a clue. I'm going to guess it just says Hawkeye FPV, but yeah, you tell me. You get some stickers. Next thing in the box you then get is a ND filter. I haven't used this, I probably should. I might do it at some point in the future, but it's nice that they include an ND filter. It doesn't actually say anywhere what grade ND filter this is. It might say it somewhere online. If it does, I'll write it down here somewhere so you know. But you get an ND filter. And then the last thing you get in the box is this little bag of accessories here. And this is where things start to get interesting, because these accessories start to kind of reveal some of the capabilities of this camera. So we'll just open up the bag now and we'll start to have a look. So one of the things you get is this little cable here. This is a USB-C connector on one end with like a headphone jack kind of connector on the other end. What this cable is used for is you can plug it obviously into the side of the camera like that. This end here you can then plug directly into, say, an FPV monitor or a pair of FPV goggles if your goggles have got a supporting connector on it. And then what you can do is you can pass the image from the camera straight through, you know, to your screen or your goggles. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, why would you want to do that? Like, what would be the benefit in, you know, having the camera connected to your screen, especially on such a short cable? Well, that would be because in the bag of accessories, you also get this guy here. This is a little OSD programmer board. And what you can do with this is this will plug into the back. It goes into this little connector on the side like that. And then if you've got the camera connected up to, say, a screen, you can then use this OSD programmer board to program the camera. So on the Runcam Thumb, if you wanted to make any changes to the settings, you had to modify a text file on your computer and then save it to the SD card when you put it in the camera. Which, yeah, that works, but it's not very practical if you're in the middle of a flying field, because chances are you don't have your computer with you. On the Runcam Thumb Pro, it got a little bit better. You could use an app on your phone to make changes, which would then generate a QR code, and then you'd hold that up in front of the camera. That sort of worked sometimes, but it was a bit temperamental, especially if it was a really bright, sunny day. But with this camera, you use the little OSD programming board here. You can then, I'll put a little bit of footage up here so you can see it. You can then access a proper menu, and it's a very in-depth menu. There's a lot more settings that you can change on this camera than there is in any of the Runcam ones. Yeah, you can make all the changes in your settings via that, which I personally find to be a much, you know, nicer experience. It's a bit more intuitive way of changing settings. So that's a really interesting feature. Now, on the note of interesting features, this camera actually does have a bit of a party trick. It has one unique feature that I've never seen on any camera of this style before. And that is that this camera can actually be used as a FPV camera. If you look on the back on this little port here, there's actually a pin labeled video. And what you can do is you can connect this directly to an analog video transmitter, and then you can use this as an analog FPV camera. And I've actually tried this. You know, I'll put some footage up here. A couple of days ago, I actually did install this camera on my Atomasi Swordfish, and I installed a analog FPV video transmitter on there. And then I actually used this camera to do some flying, and it actually did work surprisingly well. I can't remember what the quoted latency is. I'll put it on the screen down here somewhere. But it's a very, like, quite a low latency connection between the camera and the video transmitter, and you can absolutely use it to fly. You probably wouldn't want to use it if you're trying to fly a race quad around a track. The latency would probably be a bit slow for that. But if you're going to be flying, fixed wing, like I do, or maybe if you want to fly like a Cineroop or something, like something that's not going to be going crazy fast, you can absolutely use this as a FPV camera, and it works really well. Now you might be thinking, well, why would you ever want to do that? Well, I guess it really depends on your build. Like if you're trying to save weight on your aircraft, and you want to be able to record HD, but you don't necessarily want to have to carry two cameras, that's a really good option. It means that you can have the best of both worlds. And as I was mentioning a minute ago, when you're using the OSD programmer to make changes, I mean, if you don't happen to have this little cable with you, but the camera is connected to an analog video transmitter, then you can just make all those changes via your goggles. As long as you've got this OSD programmer with you, and you can plug that into the back of the camera, you can then, via your goggles, you can make all of the changes, and you can see that nice, color menu, in the goggles. I think that is a really cool feature. You don't get that on any of the Runcam Thumb cameras. What was the other one? The codec Peanut. You didn't get it with that either, or the Insta360 Go. This is the first camera I've seen which actually has a video out pin on the back that allows you to use it as an FPV camera. So yeah, that's one of the big selling points of this camera. It's one of the advanced features that this camera has that the Runcam Thumb doesn't have. You can use it as an FPV camera. Anyway, let's go back to having a look at what else you get in the box. You also get another one of these cables. I don't know what the difference is. So you have this black one here and then this red one here. They both look exactly the same, to be honest. I don't see any difference at all. I don't know why there's two. If I manage to figure it out, I'll write down here explaining why. But yeah, you get two of them. You then also get this cable here. I'm guessing actually you could take this cable, plug it into that, and then that's like what, like a composite video connector, AV connector. Maybe it's like a little adapter or something, so that if your monitor or your goggles doesn't have a connection for this, you can connect it into that and then plug it in. I'm not really sure. If I figure it out, I'll write it down here. If not, it's a mystery that we can try and solve together. You get that, and then the only other thing you get in the box is you get 3 of these cables here. And basically what these are is these are power connector cables. So that will plug into the big connector on the back of the camera like that. Then the other end here, this is actually designed to be connected directly to a balance connector on a battery. And the difference between the 3 cables that they send is that they've got different size balance connectors. So there's what? There's a 4S, 3S, and 5S or a 6S possibly. Not really sure. But yeah, they provide you these cables here so you can then connect the camera directly to a battery. And that's actually another interesting feature of this camera. So if you ever had the Runcam Thumb or the Thumb Pro, those cameras could only be powered by a 5-volt power supply. You couldn't power them with anything else, which meant that you had to connect it to something with like a voltage regulator. This camera here though can be connected to anything between a 5 and a 23-volt power supply without the need for like any kind of regulator. That's obviously like a really cool feature. It potentially makes wiring a little bit easier. The only interesting thing that I will note is that of all of the cables they send you, they don't actually send you a cable with a wire that connects to the video out function on the back of the camera. That's a bit of an odd decision by Hawkeye. Not really sure why they do that. Like, one of the main features of this camera is you can use it as an FPV camera, but they don't provide you with the wiring to do it. It's not too hard. Obviously, like I mentioned, I already did it myself, connected it as an FPV camera. It's not too hard to kind of find like one of those cables knocking around in your spares bin. But yeah, just a bit of an odd thing that they don't include that wire. So yeah, that's basically everything you get in the box. And I've given you a little bit of a tour of the camera. So I guess now it's time to talk a little bit about how well the camera performs. So obviously I showed you a minute ago some footage that I recorded with the camera when I was using it as an FPV camera. But that was just like DVR footage, taken from my monitor. Obviously what you want to know is, how good is it at actually recording HD, and, crucially, how good is it, with Gyroflow. So what I'll do is I'll put some footage up in the corner here to show you some of the flights that I've recorded. And in general, I think it's not a bad camera. It's not the best I've ever used, but it's also not the worst. I certainly say it's better than the original Runcam Thumb. I mean, for a start, this is a 4K camera, whereas the original Runcam Thumb was only a 1080p camera. My complaints, though, are that just the image looks a little bit lacking in contrast. It's a nice big wide image, like this camera's got a nice big wide lens on it. I can't remember exactly how wide it is, but it's a nice big wide image. But the footage just looks like it's lacking a little bit of contrast. And it also doesn't seem to be especially sharp. It's a little bit on the soft side. Now, I might just be being a bit of a harsh critic here. I mean, you can certainly fix the contrast quite easily with a video editor. In fact, I'll do it now, so you can kind of see what it looks like when it's been fixed. After which, I think the footage, looks like quite decent. It looks alright. Obviously, what you want to see though is, how does the footage look when it's been stabilized? So I'll now show you some of that. And as you can see, it's not bad. It actually stabilizes the footage quite well. I was a little bit concerned, when I first loaded some footage into Gyroflow, because I'll put another thing down here. When I loaded the footage into Gyroflow, the video data and the gyro data didn't seem to sync very well. As you can see, there's a lot of different colored lines down here. All of those lines represent sync points, and they should all be green to show that there's been a perfect sync. I think if they're sort of yellow or orange, it means it's only been a partial sync, and if it's red, it means that those points haven't managed to sync at all. And as you can see here, the footage and the gyro data didn't sync very well at all for some reason. So I was a little bit worried that the footage wasn't going to look very good when it was stabilized. But actually, I think you'll agree it does look quite good. I think the stabilized footage has worked reasonably well. It does kind of sort of stutter and jitter a little bit every now and again. It sort of look a little bit robotic here and there. I'm not really sure what that's all about. It could possibly be something to do with my Gyroflow settings. Although I think that's unlikely because I use Gyroflow with a couple of other cameras I have and it always works fine with them. So maybe it's something specific about the Hawkeye Thumb. Maybe that needs some very specific settings. I did read in the manual online that the Hawkeye actually do recommend some specific settings. I think one of them is they recommend that you change a setting to be, was it essential matrix or something? Either way, I did try using the exact settings that Hawkeye recommended, but I personally didn't find it made much difference. I still sort of found that I was having this sort of weird syncing problem in Gyroflow, regardless of what settings I used. So maybe it's a problem with the camera. Maybe there's something that Hawkeye can fix in a future firmware update. But like I said a minute ago, even though the footage doesn't seem to sync very well with the gyro data, the actual rendered output from Gyroflow seems to be pretty good. It's certainly perfectly usable footage that I'd be happy to put in my YouTube videos or put on Instagram. I think the stabilization looks nice. It smooths out the footage nicely and it doesn't crop it too much as well, which is an important point to mention. Now, I tested this camera several times over the last couple of weeks, and in each of the tests I tried doing different things just to get a really good feel for how good the camera was. Now, the footage you've just been watching, that was recorded in 4K at 30 frames per second. This camera is capable of recording at 4K 50 frames per second, but for some reason, if you use that higher frame rate option, you can't also have the gyro data. So that's why I recorded at 30 frames per second. This camera is capable of also shooting at 2.5K resolution and also 1080p resolution. And for both of those, you have the option of either 30 frames per second or 50 frames per second. So in some of the other test flights that I did, I tried some of those other resolution options. So I tried 2.5K, which I don't really understand the point of because that just kind of creates a really square video, which it's just really impractical. So I'm not really very excited about that. But I did also try the 1080p option at 50 frames per second, and that seemed quite nice. In all honesty, I couldn't really say that I noticed much difference in resolution between 1080p and 4K. Both images, seemed fairly similar. But obviously, you had the higher frame rate, which made the footage look a little bit nicer. So that was the kind of cool thing to do. I did also experiment with different mounting options for the camera. So for a couple of the flights, I had the camera mounted on a PLA mount that I designed and printed myself. Obviously PLA being like a hard, rigid plastic. But in one of the test flights, I actually changed that and I used a TPU mount instead. But weirdly, I actually found that this didn't work very well at all. And that might be just due to the mount that I made not being very good. Basically, when I used a TPU mount, I ended up with lots of jello in the footage, and a lot of vibration was coming through, which, even after I stabilized the footage in Gyroflow, the footage just looked horrible. You still see that jello, really prominently. Like I said, it might just be the mount I made wasn't very good. I only used, I think it's 20% infill on that mount, so, maybe the mount just wasn't solid enough. Maybe there's way too much flex in it. It's also worth mentioning that, on the day where I was testing this, it was quite a windy, quite a gusty day, so the aircraft was rocking around a lot as well. So yeah, it may just be that there was too much flex in that mount, which is, what caused all this jello. But ultimately, I found that actually just using a PLA mount seemed to get the best results. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be putting this camera on like a quad, which obviously is going to have a lot more vibration, then you probably would want a TPU mount of some sort, but on an aircraft, like a foam aircraft, I think, just the fact the aircraft is made of foam means that there's already quite a lot of vibration isolation going on. So yeah, I think you're absolutely fine to use like a solid mount made out of PLA. So yeah, what else is there to mention about this camera? Well, one thing I just want to point out is the audio. So this camera does have a mic on board, but the audio isn't very good. So, I mean, last year I did a review of the Runcam Thumb Pro, and one thing I actually credit that camera for was the fact that it had really good like microphone. Specifically, it had like really good like wind noise suppression. I'll put a little bit of footage up from the Thumb Pro here for you to listen to now, just for comparison. As you can hear, you could kind of hear some wind noise, but not very much. Like the camera had done a good job of kind of muting it. So like you could hear the motors running quite well, but you couldn't really hear the wind noise. It wasn't too bad. Now for comparison, here is the audio from this new Hawkeye Thumb camera. Just a warning, if you're wearing headphones, don't. Turn your volume down. This doesn't sound very good. Here you go. As you can hear, that's pretty awful. Yeah, the microphone is kind of pointless on the Hawkeye Thumb. It just picks up all the wind noise and it sounds terrible. It might be possible to try and add some kind of like suppression to that. The only problem is like I can't actually see on the camera where the microphone is. I would say like you could put a little bit of foam over it, but yeah, as far as I can tell, the microphone's internal somewhere, which makes it even more surprising that you get so much more wind noise. There are 4 screws on the back of the camera, so I guess you could open it up, find the microphone, and then try putting a bit of foam over it. That would probably work. But yeah, straight out of the box, the audio quality of this camera is not very good. But then you're probably not buying the camera for its audio capabilities. There is one thing about this camera that I really don't like. Although this won't apply to everyone, but this does apply to me. So this camera natively records using the H.265 codec. This is a much newer codec you get on, newer cameras. Older cameras tend to record on the older H.264 codec protocol. The reason why this annoys me is because the new H.265 protocol doesn't seem to be fully compatible with my computer. I can play the videos on my computer straight away with no problem, and I can load the videos into Gyroflow and, render them through Gyroflow with no problem. But the video editor that I use for making, these videos, I use one called HitFilm. That isn't compatible with H.265 for some reason. I've tried troubleshooting that and I can't get past it. So that's meant that all of the footage that I've recorded on this camera like the raw footage. To be able to show it to you in this video here, I've had to convert it using a bit of software called Handbrake, which is just, it's an extra annoyance. It's one extra level of image processing that you have to do, which is just, it's a bit of... Now, obviously, this isn't going to apply to everyone. It depends on your computer, how powerful your computer is, and also what video editor you're using. It may not be a problem for you. But for me, and I'm sure for other people, that H.265 codec that this camera is using, it might be a bit of an issue. And I've had a look in the camera settings. I can't see any way anywhere to change that. So yeah, just something to be aware of. So anyway, that's enough of me kind of rambling about this camera. Let's now get to the point. Is this camera any good, and is it something that you should consider buying? I personally think that, yeah, I think actually it's a pretty good camera. I mean, the fact that not only can this shoot 4K resolution footage and you can stabilize in gyro flow, but the fact that you can also use this as an FPV camera, I think that makes this a really, really good option. And crucially, the fact that this camera is cheaper than the Runcam Thumb Pro, which is the direct competition for this, I think you'd be silly to go with the Runcam, you know, because you get more for your money with this, and you're paying less money for this as well. Yeah, the image quality isn't amazing. It's not the best quality in the world, but I mean, equally, this is a £60 camera. It's not a GoPro, is it? You get what you pay for. I still think that the image quality is good, and as I proved earlier on, like, you can enhance the image quality quite easily with like a video editor to make the footage look a lot nicer. So yeah, I do think that this camera is a good option. Now, I should probably just mention that Hawkeye did send me this camera for free to review. However, that has not affected my opinion of this camera in the slightest. I refuse to be one of those YouTubers that will just try and sell your product because it was sent to me for free to review and I want to keep the company happy. I don't care what the company thinks. I'm here to, you know, give good information to you guys. But that said, on this occasion, I do think that this camera is a good camera. And I think the chances are, if I was in the market for buying a small little like HD stabilized camera like this would probably be the one that I'd go for at the moment, because, you know, it's cheaper than Runcam and it's got more features than Runcam. So yeah, chances are this would be the camera I'd buy for myself. So yeah, that's been my review of the Hawkeye Thumb 4K. Hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I know I've kind of sort of talked quite a lot and it's been, you know, a little bit long, but hopefully I've managed to, you know, give you all the information that you need to know to help you decide for yourself whether this is a camera that might be good for you. If you enjoyed watching this video, please do give it a like, because that helps keep the YouTube algorithm happy. And yeah, I've basically run out of things to say now, so I will bid you farewell and I will catch you in the next video. Cheers guys, bye.